YouTube, welcome back to Unplugged with Alex, and today we're going to be doing a rookie mock draft, Superflex, tight end premium, and we're going to be using landing spots from Dane Brugler's most recent mock draft. Dane is a very respected draft analyst and usually has these things relatively correct at this point, or at least a foundational understanding of where we think these guys are going to get picked in terms of draft capital, around what round. So this will be very exciting to sort of start slotting players in at certain points in this rookie draft based off some hypothetical draft capital. So thank you guys for tuning in. If you guys enjoy, please smash the subscribe and the like button. It helps me out a ton, and we're on that journey to 500 subs. So let's just jump into it right now. As you can see on the bottom of the screen here, I have the landing spots and the draft capital for these players. Just to go through that quick, some interesting notions. We have Shador going at the 106 to the Raiders and Cam Ward going at the 101 to the Titans. So we're seeing a 5-pick difference there between those two, and Cam Ward being the first quarterback off the board. So I guess he thinks a little bit, or he thinks that the NFL will think a little higher of Cam Ward compared to Shador Sanders. Ted McMillan, 104 to the Patriots. I don't think it's going to happen, but that would be a good spot in terms of fantasy. We have Emeka going 121 to the Steelers, and Genty at the 120 to the Broncos. An interesting spot for me. I'll jump into that. And then my favorite landing spot of them all, Caleb Johnson at 124 to the Vikings. So you guys can see those all at the bottom of the screen, but we'll just jump into the picks right here. Coming off the board at the 101 for me in this mock draft will be Ashton Genty. This is not going to change no matter what landing spot we have or draft capital in that matter. I think he definitely goes in the first round, so I'm not worried about that. Peyton has already acknowledged that he is willing to use multiple backs and he wants to use multiple backs, even though that is the way the NFL is trending. So I'm not that worried about that. It's just the fact that I can't trust anything that Sean Payton says. He doesn't have the best track record with those sort of things, but it isn't a good offense to get into, but I would just rather see him somewhere like the Chargers. With that being said, still the 101, no doubt in my mind. Fantastic player and should have production right off the rip. At the 102, sticking with my guns here, it's going to be Caleb Johnson. And I am higher than most on Caleb Johnson. I love the tempo that Johnson plays with. He plays downhill. My favorite thing about him is when he's making moves, he's never tiptoeing behind the line. He's always moving forward. He picks his gap and he goes. And that's just what I love about Johnson. Great balance, tremendous vision. So I'm excited with Johnson, especially if he ends up at the 124 to the Vikings like he did in this mock. The first round draft capital for him has been heating up that conversation, and if Dane is saying this, then I am very intrigued to see how high Johnson will end up going. This is my dream landing spot, and this is where I would be more than willing to take him at the 102. If he ends up second round draft capital to a team I don't like, I think he definitely ends up moving down the board, but in this scenario, he's my no doubt smash 102. Love Caleb Johnson, especially to the Vikings in that scenario. So the 103, I have Ted McMillan. Ted goes at the 104 to the Patriots in this draft. I like the spot for Ted. I think he can demand plenty of targets in New England, and I think he'll get force-fed the ball. They don't have the weapons, and you get Drake May. You add him to that. You add Ted to that offense, and I think you get some explosive plays down the field with May's deep ball, and I think he gets fed underneath as well with the yak presence that McMillan has. Great player, has that big frame. Obviously, some people are becoming more and more worried about the route running, which I understand in a sense. I've said it before, but he wins in a different way, and I think the way he wins can translate to the NFL. He is a great athlete, so I think Tet at the 103 here, going to the Patriots, would be a good spot for him. Coming off the board here at the 104, I have Luther Burden, and he landed at the 112 with the Dallas Cowboys in this mock draft from Dane. I absolutely love this landing spot for Burden. He's my wide receiver 3 pre-draft at this moment. If it did go down like this, he would end up being my wide receiver 2 in terms of dynasty fantasy football in this rookie mock, just because I love that Dallas landing spot, and I think he can take advantage of those short intermediate routes underneath. I saw on Twitter somebody called him Debo with a jetpack, and I absolutely love that comparison. He just has so much strength for a power slot, and I'm a big fan of Burden's game, so I think ending up here in Dallas is perfect for him, and he moves up that one wide receiver spot with Emeka Egbuka falling back a little bit, but pre-draft I do have Egbuka in front of Burden, but I do love this spot for Burden, and I would be ecstatic if he ended up here. Coming in at the 105, I have another Dallas Cowboy in this draft, Travion Henderson. He ended up going at the 212 to the Cowboys, and this is perfect for him, in my opinion. Again, I think Dallas is a good spot for a lot of these guys because they're just in need of explosive players. CD cannot do it all, and I think you get him in a backfield where he has the opportunity to take away from Dowdle touches as well as get those high-value touches that he, I think, will earn no matter what. That's why I love Henderson. He will get the high-value touches, and he will turn them into fantasy points because he is so explosive. So you give Dowdle those grinding downs, and then you give Henderson some opportunities mixed in there, and you give him that passing game work. You give him some other explosive gadgety plays, whatever you want to do with Henderson. I think the Cowboys can take advantage of that, and I love him to the Cowboys. He would end up being my 105, a lot higher than most have him. He is my pre-draft RB3 at this point. Big fan of Henderson's game, and I think this would be a perfect spot for him. So coming in at the 106 here, I have Omarion Hampton, and he got a nice little landing spot here with the Las Vegas Raiders at the 205. They have an empty backfield, another team that needs some weapons, but this would be a nice little draft for them. You see in this, they end up with Shador, you get Hampton, so then you have Hampton, Shador, Myers, Bowers. I think that's a very solid core, at least for a fantasy environment at this point. I would like what they did in this draft a lot. So Hampton, downhill, hard runner, physical, but also smooth in the passing game. He's a big boy. He is my RB4, though. I do have a little bit of concerns that he sort of seems like a juiced up Brian Robinson to me. Could be a crazy comp, at least for the way he plays, but that's how I see it. I think he's a much better back than Robinson, but I'm not willing to put him above any of the other three guys right now. I still think he's good, but just my RB4 at this point. I do like the landing spot for him here with the Raiders. I think he would take up every single touch he can get there. There's simply just nobody as talented as him in that backfield, so I do like this spot, but currently my 106, I know a few people might end up having him higher in terms of their running back rankings. So now into the 107 area, I have Emeka Egbuka coming off the board here. He went at the 21st pick to the Pittsburgh Steelers, and I do not like this landing spot. I know situations can be short-term, and we should be taking advantage of people who are down on the situation, but I just can't put him above Burden on the Cowboys at this point. Egbuka is probably one of my favorite players in this draft in terms of where we're going to be getting him in terms of value, and I think at the 107 is great value here. I don't know. I don't want to see him in Pittsburgh. I just think that environment isn't exactly one where he can thrive. They're not going to be passing the ball a ton. They're very balanced, so I think Egbuka will still score you plenty of fantasy points, and I think he's going to be a great player, but can't give him that upside that somebody like Burden has, I think, in Dallas, even though he would be the wide receiver too. Egbuka might be able to battle with George Pickens for that number one spot, or if Pickens ends up leaving at some point, because they have known to get rid of their wide receivers who can be divas. But at the 108 here, this is where I have Cam Ward, and I have been on record saying that I have Shador Sanders over Cam Ward. In fantasy, I'm starting to lean towards having Ward over Sanders simply for the upside. Ward has the tools, and I think I've underestimated that a little bit. I think if one quarterback comes out of this class and ends up being a high-end dynasty asset, I think it's Cam Ward over Shador Sanders. If we're just talking pure intangibles and physical traits, I think Ward has Sanders beat out. And again, it's going to come down to a landing spot like this. He ended up with the 101 at the Titans, and they don't have a lot of weapons, so it's not great. I'd probably rather have him in somewhere like Vegas, where Shador ends up. But still, if the NFL views him as the number one pick, I think I'm going to have him going as the first quarterback off the board here. Still further behind than a lot of people would likely have in these drafts, but I'm comfortable taking him at the 108 here, and I'd be happy with that value, to be honest. I hope that they pick up a couple more weapons to make Ward a little bit more enticing, but I don't mind that value here at the 108. I just can't take him over any of these other players I have in front of him. I just think they provide more consistent upside here. So coming in at the 109, my tight end one in the class, Tyler Warren, certified stud this year, ended up at the 14th pick to the Indianapolis Colts. He's been consistently mocked here throughout this entire process. I think it is a good spot for him. As Ray GQ mentions, it is Anthony Richardson needs an easy button. He needs a target that he can sort of just dump off to, or have a big guy down the middle that he can take advantage of. He talks about Jalen Hurts' development, and he had Dallas Goedert, who was somebody who could just lean on in the middle when he was, trying to get up to speed in that passing game. So I think that would be an answer for Anthony Richardson, to have a target like Warren over the middle. Super physical, imposing player, and has a lot of yak ability. I don't love the Colts spot for him. I'm still willing to take him because I believe in the talent. But again, I don't want Anthony Richardson throwing him the ball for fantasy. I don't think that's a great recipe, but I think it will give Richardson a target here. Again, this is tight end premium, so I am going to push these tight ends up a little bit, and I think Warren is definitely warranting a back end mid first round pick here in these drafts. So Warren to the Colts. I have here Shedeur Sanders coming off the board at the 110. This is funny because I think about where we saw Kenny Pickett go off the board in his rookie draft, and it was around the 109, 110 with a player like Chris Olave. That's where they were going together, around the same ADP, and it's just the fact that, Sanders, I've mentioned, I think he can be a quality NFL starter. I really do. Am I willing to put him over some of these other position guys that I think could just be better assets in fantasy, regardless of if we're talking quarterback or if we're talking receiver, running back? I would just rather have some of the guys I believe in more, regardless of the positional value, in Superflex. But ends up with the Raiders here. As I mentioned, they get a bunch of weapons, and it would be a great spot for Shedeur. I think he can produce fantasy points. He'll have Tom Brady in his ear, I'm sure, teaching him plenty of things. So it would be a great spot for Shedeur, and I think you're getting good value at the 110, just not somebody I'd be willing to take over the upside or just consistent level of play I think we're going to see from some of these other guys. So at the 111, my tight end 2, Colston Loveland, extremely smooth. I love where he ended up here. The 122 to the LA Chargers reunites with Harbaugh. I love that for him. They are in dire need of a weapon, as we saw in that playoff game. We can't just feed Ladd McConkey the ball the entire time. And Loveland will be able to take advantage of that. He can run routes like no other tight end in this class. He is very special when it comes to gaining separation. I've seen some people worried about the yak. I think if he's gaining separation and demanding targets, he's going to be able to produce in fantasy, especially in tight end premium. So I love this landing spot for Loveland. And rounding out the back half of the first round, I have Travis Hunter. I moved him back here a little bit from my last mock. He ends up with the Giants here at the 103. Coming into a team that has Malik Neighbors, has their number one target already defined. I'm moving him back a little bit. We will see what the conversations are like as we get closer to draft time on where he's going to be playing. I think he plays both sides of the ball, and I think he plays more receiver than people are giving him credit for at this point. But I don't love the Giants spot just because it's not a wide open receiver room where I'm like, they're going to have to play him. They have a couple of weapons between Neighbors and Wandale, but I'm going to keep him at the back half of the first year. I think we're going to see a lot of movement with Hunter throughout the draft process here. So I'm comfortable with where I have him at the 112, and this is kind of where I have a little bit of a tier break. Like these first 12 picks, in my opinion, yeah, obviously not everybody's going to hit, but I'd be comfortable taking most of these guys. I feel like if you kept your first round pick this year, between the 105 and the 112, like you're picking players that kind of are in that same sort of tier a little bit. So I think this is where the first tier break, really a big tier break. Obviously, I have one between Genty. That's just tier 1. I kind of have tier 2 right now between Johnson and McMillan. In this draft with these landing spots would be Johnson, McMillan. And then Burden, Henderson, Hampton, Egbuka, Ward is one tier. And then I'd have the last 4 here in another tier. So moving on to the 201, Trey Harris. These next 2 picks, I think, are going to be kind of make or break in this class. I think it could end up changing how people view the class a lot. Trey Harris here we have ending up in the second round, the 26th pick, to the Houston Texans. They get 2 towers between Trey Harris and Nico Collins here. Trey does not get enough credit for how good his route running is. He was injured this year. I think he would be a surefire first-round pick if he ended up playing through the entire year. We'll see. If he ends up in Houston, they do need a weapon, and I am a fan of this landing spot for him. Again, he doesn't get enough credit for his yak chops for how big he is and his route running. So I do like Harris, and in a place like Houston, I think he's worthy of this early second-round pick. Moving on, we have a recent add to the class. So we lost Nick Singleton about a week ago. He announced that he will be returning to Penn State. But then we added Matthew Golden. And in this mock, Dane already has him at the 208 to the Saints. And this is an empty receiver room. They need receivers desperately. They've been, marred with injuries constantly. And Golden is a special player. He hasn't produced at a crazy level, but came almost at 1,000 yards at Texas this year. Has struggled with some injuries, but he has phenomenal instincts, and he is a guy that can do it all, whether it's short, intermediate, or deep. Golden has strong hands, great instincts when he catches the ball where he needs to go with it. I think he's going to be a big-time riser. Again, we didn't see crazy production, but he has the physical tools to be a 1A in the NFL, in my opinion. So we'll see. I do like this landing spot for him. So again, he and Harris are going to be big time in determining the success of this class, in my opinion. Now, at the 203, Jalen Milroe. He lands at the Giants here early in the second round. Kind of shocking to me from Dan Brugler to have him going this early, but that tells me that Milroe decided to come to the draft for a reason. I think somebody was in his ear telling him, you're going to be a second round pick. Like, this quarterback class is weak. You're going to get pushed up boards, as it happens every year. So if he ends up going this early in the second, I mean, the draft capital's there. You landing in an empty quarterback room. How are we not going to take the shot on Milroe at this point in a draft? The upside is there. Special tools, special talent. I'm usually not the fan of the guy who I think really struggles to throw the ball. I was against Anthony Richardson, and I don't think he's really as good a passer as Richardson, but I think he started more games, has a little bit more experience. So I think we take the upside shot here with Milroe, and he's going to get some run on those tires playing for the Giants. So take the opportunity here at the 203. At the 204, I have Quinshad Judkins. Now, he did not go in this mock draft from Dane Brugler in the first two rounds, so we do not have a landing spot for Judkins. There's a couple other guys on this board who did not get landing spots, so I'm not going to draft everybody in this because I still have some players that if they were to go third, fourth round, I'd probably still have above just because I like them as players. This is the first one we see that's not on the draft board. Judkins, no landing spot. I still think he has the opportunity to be a good grinder in the NFL. He's had a good playoff run here in the college football playoffs. And, I think he's somebody who can demand some touches. I've gotten lower and lower on Judkins, unfortunately, just because, I don't think we're going to see, again, if he doesn't even go in the first two rounds, I don't think we're going to see him commanding a backfield. So I have Judkins at the 204 here. At the 205, I have Alec Iomanner. And he lands with the Commanders here at the 28th pick in the second round. They need a weapon, and I like Iomanner here. He's a girthy player. Like, he's not huge, but he's wide and strong. Has played well. Didn't exactly have crazy production, similar to somebody like Matthew Golden, but I think he has good upside and would warrant one of these picks, especially landing with Jaden Daniels and the Commanders. Now, this landing spot is going to be very coveted. Landing with Jaden Daniels, as we're seeing this playoff performance that he's having, he looks to be one of the surefire cornerstone quarterbacks in the NFL right now. So whoever ends up going to the Commanders is going to rise up these rookie draft boards. I'm telling you that right now. At the 206, I have Devin Neal, another running back that I'm higher on than most, has great tempo, vision, plays fast and slow at the same time, and I love his burst. So very quick, didn't end up going in the first two rounds in this draft, and I don't think he goes the first two rounds in the NFL draft. I'm hoping for third round draft capital and landing in a spot where he can eventually take some touches, but Neal, I'm a big fan on. He's getting closer and closer to Judkins, in my opinion. May end up with Neal over Judkins at some point in this draft process. So no landing spot for Judkins there. Harold Fannin here going off at the 207 in my mock. He went to the Dolphins in the second round, the 16th pick of the second round. This is surprising in my opinion. This is going pretty high in the second round. I'm not sure he ends up getting this draft capital. We will see, but ends up literally behind his player comp, and that's Jonnu Smith. I think they are very similar build and play style. They're not huge, but they are receiving threats. And I think if we could transfer one-to-one production from Fannin to Jonnu, obviously you would take that. in Mike McDaniel's system. You're going to see a lot of dink and dunk tight end plays, and Fannin will have to be, developed into that role. I don't think he ends up commanding targets right away, so a little bit more of a developmental pick. The other tight end that gets picked in this mock in the first 2 rounds is Mason Taylor. I don't have him going in the top 24 here. Taylor, I think, is a good tight end, a little bit more of a balanced player, great run blocker, solid receiver, son of Jason Taylor, actually. But yeah, I don't have him in that top 24 yet. Broncos were cycling a lot of tight ends this year. Not sure if that's because they really didn't have any good ones, which they didn't, or that's just how they're going to rock and roll. They're always going to be running out with 2-3 tight ends and just, spreading the love. So we will see on Mason Taylor. Coming in at the 208 here, I have Jalen Knoll, somebody I've got higher and higher on, receiver out of Iowa State. I have him higher than Jaden Higgins. Even though Higgins went in the second round in this draft to the Chiefs, I still am much higher on Knoll, especially if he ends up going in the third round. I just think Knoll's the better player, but mostly a slot guy, powerful hands, plays with good tempo. Not a real burner, but he is a deep threat. He caught plenty of deep balls this past year, but 80 receptions, over 1,000 yards this last season. I think if you go watch Knoll, you'll be very surprised with how well he played, and that he's not getting more hype at this point right now. So I do have Jalen Knoll going off the 208 here, even though he was not in this draft. Then I have Xavier Restrepo, another guy that I'm slowly getting higher on. He's like a mechanic, in my opinion. This kid can just get open on command, and he's very good with the underneath stuff, the intermediate stuff. Produced unbelievably well with Cam Ward. Again, not ending up in these first 2 rounds, and I don't think he does end up in the first 2 rounds in the real NFL draft, but I do like Restrepo a lot. DJ Giddens, another running back that I am high on. Had him higher than Devin Neal in my last mock. I'm coming around to Devin Neal being the better back. Giddens is very elusive, but I think I do like Neal more. I do like Judkins still more, and he did not go in the first 2 rounds here. Another guy that I don't think goes in the first 2 rounds. But we'll see with the landing spot with Giddens. A lot of these last guys are sort of guys that I'm looking to get that draft capital and good landing spot, because these are more the guys that I'm looking to target. Here we have Cam Skattebo. Did not go in the first 2 rounds. Don't think he does in the NFL draft either, but a guy that I'm also coming around on. I mean, the man had 1,700 rush yards this last year, a bunch of receiving yards. He's an all-around can-do-it-all guy. He's always been doubted, and he seems to just keep doing it. Like, this guy cannot be stopped no matter what level it is. I think he runs angry, and wherever he ends up, I think he's just going to be one of those culture-setting running backs that you give the ball because they are going to grind the opposing team down. So Skattebo, I'm starting to come around on. And the last guy I have here would be Jaden Higgins. Personally, not my favorite receiver that I've watched, but he does land with the Chiefs here. I think that would be a great landing spot for any receiver. We'll see what they do in the offseason in terms of openings, because they do have Xavier Worthy, and then they have Marquise Brown, who I believe is on a 1-year deal, as well as Hopkins. I don't know what his status is, so we will see what that room will look like. But yeah, this rounds out the top 24 players I have for this rookie mock draft. This was Dane Brugler's mock, so it was good to see some of these landing spots and about where these guys are going to go, or not going to go, but may end up going, because Dane is usually pretty good with this sort of stuff. So good to get an early look here. I hope you guys enjoyed seeing this draft board and, start picking out where you're starting to see some players that you like and where they may end up in the NFL draft. So thank you guys for watching, and until next time.
I got one full smoking, I got one full boxing, I got one full parking. I'm sitting supervising, I'm the head of the department, look.